So I think it's really helping the right person to find the right thing that works for them, and not try and, oh, you need to go to college just because, well, that should be the thing everyone does. Well, that person might not be suitable for that, and they'll be miserable if they go and try and do all that academic work when they really should be working with their hands, and doing something practical. So, and I think that's why, bringing up a child in the way they should go, which is not about the way we want them to go, but the way that God has designed them. And that is the key when it comes to education, I think. What aligns to God's design for their lives, and then helping them fulfill that is the best thing, really.
I was just wondering, I know it's just my thing, the how most houses are now being boarded up, most shops are being boarded up, and yet there are so many homeless people on the streets still, and we are not able to help them and bring them into the warmth. And I kept thinking about what you are doing in Barnstable and how well it's been done, and yet we are not able to duplicate this thing around the nation, even though there is so much space now to do it. And I was just wondering if that is a possibility to duplicate what you are doing in Barnstable, in other places.
Yeah, if God gives that direction to people, I think we're very open to obviously help people establish whatever that they feel led to do, and we'll help them in whatever way. Obviously, we're not franchising what we do in any way. It's very much we're doing what God's called us to do, and others really will do what they feel God led them to do. But if we can help them, definitely we're always willing to help with policies and experience and other things. Really, someone has to have a vision that God gives them for their area, and they've got to be passionate about it, because it's not easy. I started it in 1998 initially, and it's taken a long time to get it to the point where it is now.
Wow.
But you have to have a vision, and you have to have that passion from God to be able to get through the difficult times and push through and overcome the obstacles. And initially, when everyone tries to do something like this, there's probably objections and difficulties from the local agencies and authorities or Christians and this, that, and the other. So you've got to learn to overcome all that, and essentially learn to press through, deal with whatever situations that there are, and keep going, and essentially everything starts with the first step. So if you start with the first step and you keep following after God, then you get where you're going to go. And I guess, we are held up as sort of best practice for a lot of things, really. Because we've developed the relationships locally with the agencies. Our building is now a multi-purpose building. Local authority, rough sleeping group, they work in our building. We have a doctor of surgery, we've got nurses, we've got CPNs, and all different types of things available for people on site, drugs worker, different things. Because we've developed the relationships, we work with others. We don't do things independently. We try and do things as God directs, but also in relationship with others. So it's possible in any place, if God inspires that and those are willing to pursue it, and that's the thing, someone's got to champion it. It's a good idea until someone says, well, who's going to do it? That's always the thing. Someone, and you need obviously more than one person. I mean, I started on my own, being a visionary, and I developed things and moved things forward and did all those things. But eventually other people come alongside, and you then start working together with others. And for me, then I pass it on to others, and then others take it on. But you have to have people who are willing to put in the hard graft at the beginning to make something, get something off the ground, and really, where's the finance going to come from? And all of those questions have to be asked, where's the money? Who's going to support this? How are we going to get money from, and it's the cart and the horse. Unless you're doing something, you're not going to get any money for it. And, how are you going to start something without any money? And it's always that question. And a lot of it is, okay, well, where's God's provision? And the biggest provision you can have is people. Initially, people giving their time, you've got to set up the right legal entity to run the organizations. ICOs are probably the best ones, in incorporated charitable organizations. You just can't go into it blind, hoping for the best, because you need to have a plan. What is it God's saying? How are we going to get there? And a realistic plan, ultimately, to how long it's going to take. You're not going to develop what we've got in Barnstable in a year. Because essentially, our income and expenditure has increased and increased and increased over the years. To start with, it was just purely through the church. And so we used the church giving to be able to get that going. And then we began to get external grants and then developed our own income streams, mostly from housing. So that, we provide housing and that housing provides income. And then we use the income to, support the housing and increase what we're doing, and with the day center and everything and all the services. So it's definitely something I would say every area definitely needs.
Yeah.
But, are there the people in that area who are willing to make it happen? That's the key.
Yeah. Thank you. It would have been nice if we could go round the whole nation, because it's really sad to see all those empty houses, and yet so many people are out there.
It's true, but the people who are out there would probably not manage in most of those houses if they're not supported. Because a lot of those people can't manage tenancies. That's why they're out there, because of their chaotic nature or multi-complex needs. They're not just on the streets because they want to be. Some of them might be, but generally it's because they can't maintain a tenancy. So if you stick them in a house, who owns the house? Who's responsible for the house? If they are being boarded up, then, are they local council houses? Well, if they are, then you can maybe hold some of the council accountable for what they're doing. If they're private houses, well, you can't force private house owners to rent their house out to people who've got benefits, because you have these things, no DHSS, type of thing, because people don't want people going to wreck their houses. So it's a difficult one, it is a difficult one. But there are organizations like Green Pastures who buy up houses, who then do them up, and then rent them out to, or lease them out to the church or other Christian organizations for them then to manage. Someone's got to manage them.
Right.
And again, that requires skills, it requires the knowledge to be able to develop, because you've got to work out, how you manage a house. A lot of houses of multiple occupation have got to be brought up to standard. You have fire doors, you have to have fire security systems, alarm systems, all that type of stuff. It just doesn't happen. And who's going to invest in those houses to bring them up to spec so that people are not living in slums? Because sometimes the houses are boarded up because they're not fit for human habitation, and sometimes people are not willing to invest in bringing things up to the standard that enables someone to live in it. That's the difficulty, which really is why you need a vision from God, and then obviously eventually God's provision to be able to bring that about.
Okay, I'll bring the other one. I had a message this morning on my phone. Somebody I went to school with sent me a message and said, "Tish, why are you preaching a different gospel from what we have known?" And I thought, I said, no, I'm not preaching a different gospel. I'm preaching the same gospel. It's just the way we have understood it could be slightly different. But I quite understand what she's saying, because most people hear what we say and their first instinct is, this is not the gospel of truth. And then when they come deeper, they realize that, well, if they allow themselves to learn, then they are able to relate to what we talk about. But I think one of the things that really stood out for me was something that came up this week about suffering, that we already know before we come here what life we are coming to lead. We come into agreement with Father.
Okay.
So if somebody is living with disability, that is where I thought, okay, so if somebody is living with disability, I know that it could be something from the bloodline and all sorts of things, but would they have known beforehand? Is that a possibility?
Okay. Yeah. I don't believe so, no, because I don't believe God would ever want us to suffer.
Yeah.
So suffering is a result of independence from God and the world we live in, living independent from God, which actually brings about situations which cause people to live less than the kind of lives that God wants. See, our destiny scroll is not a list of things that we do in life. It is our identity as sons and our working together with the Father for the Father's purposes to be outworked. It's not a prescriptive thing that you have to do something a particular way, and therefore, your life is going to have suffering in it. Therefore, you've agreed to suffering before you came here. That would mean that God wanted you to suffer. He doesn't. So God has nothing bad for us to do or give to us. So in a sense, that is a result of our own choices and the choices of others around us and the world in which we live, which is obviously being restored. So ultimately, God wants to bring good out of everything. And the good that he wants to bring is in spite of us most of the time, because we make decisions which are not the best. We do things, or other people do things to us, but God will always want to bring good out of it to bring us back to the fact that that can be redeemed and then used to help us with other people. God will always try and redeem a situation and make something good out of it, and we'll learn from it. But no one agreed before they came into this realm in the spirit to go through a life of suffering or misery or disability or any of that, or abuse or any negative things that happened during this life. No one had that on their scroll. Their scroll contains their identity and their alignment as sons with the purposes of God. There's not specific things on the scroll that people tend to think of. It's a relational working out of our destiny, and what God has for us is a relationship with him that reveals who we are, and then we work in co-heirship with him for the establishing of his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. So I honestly do not believe in that whole teaching about thing, because it's a wrong understanding of God's character and nature. He's not like that, and people who think that, I think, have a wrong view of God, in my opinion, and they're not really knowing the real God, because that real God does not want us to suffer. In fact, why did Jesus come? Jesus didn't come to bring suffering, did he? Jesus came to bring healing and wholeness and deliverance and freedom and salvation. If God wanted us to suffer, then Jesus would have come to bring suffering into the earth. Well, he didn't. He it says he came to destroy the works of the evil one. And the works of the evil one, and evil there meaning poneros, which is hardship, toil, and labor of self-independent effort outside of relationship with God. And Jesus came to remove all of those sufferings, to remove all of that hardship and toil and labor, because he was like, come and follow me. Don't do it in your own strength. All who are weary and heavy laden of doing it in their own strength by dead works, come to me and find rest. So Jesus came with a whole different message, a whole different reality, calling people to follow him into freedom, in which they will discover who they are with the Father as a son, because Jesus introduces us to the Father. You can't come to the Father but through Jesus the Son. So he wants us to know our sonship, which will reveal our identity and then outwork our destiny, you know. And it's like, so I think, is it Jeremiah 29:11 or something? I think something like that. You know, I know the plans I have for you, to prosper you, not to harm you. You know, but it doesn't mean that God has a whole specific set of plans that are in detail, essentially fate. It isn't like that. God has a purpose, an identity for us, and a purpose for us to outwork in relationship with him. And we get our sons to outwork that purpose in many, many different ways. And they're not prescriptive, they're creative. So we choose how to outwork God's purpose in our lives creatively through who we are and our redemptive gift and how we're wired, and also using the redemption of the experiences we go through to be able to relate to others who go through similar experiences and bring about comfort and care and concern. And I know God has nothing bad to plan for us. It's only good. And in the context, God knows the good he wants to bring into blessing, empowerment to succeed and prosper in who we are. So it's all about who we are, not what we do per se. You know, and a lot of people's understanding of a destiny scroll is more to do with, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. I've got this ministry and I've got this vision. I'm going to work this. God is more interested in revealing who we are, revealing the vast sum of his thoughts about us that will equip us and empower us to be his sons, really, without all the detail in there. It's not a whole list of daily activities that we're all supposed to fulfill, and if we don't do it, we fail. It's a relationship to be had every day. That's really the key.
I have a question, Mike.
Yeah.
You know, 5 days with my daughter, son-in-law, and 2 grandchildren over our holiday, and always get phased. My daughter was abused by my first husband, and trying to bring, you know, the grandchildren together, and you know, there's been such anger and having to deal with things going, you know, really forgiving, but the boundaries that are really needing to be set in order for relationship. And they have sat down with all the pastors and everything, trying to bring some reconciliation into everything. And yet, you know, there's boundaries. I guess with that unconditional love, forgiveness, and yet not the evidence of restoration, where the sticky point is the boundaries.
Yeah.
You know, it's easier just to cut someone off than to say, okay, it has to be this way. My daughter, she's just really struggling with the whole thing. And of course, it affects the whole family.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in a sense, the unconditional love is an attitude of heart, which says, I hold nothing against anyone. I'm going to choose to want the best for them unconditionally. But you've got to take into account everyone's best interest. So you've got to safeguard against children and other things happening. And you have to do that carefully, with consideration and with wisdom. You see, you can forgive someone, but doesn't mean you're going to let them do the same thing to you again. Wisdom would say, yeah, I've forgiven you for what you're doing, but you're not going to do it again. You know, which is not unforgiveness. It's just wisdom. It's like, I forgive you for what you've done. I'm not holding it against you, but I am now wise to the situation, and I'm not opening myself up to the same situation again. There's nothing wrong in wisdom and applying wisdom into situations which need wisdom to be applied. And certainly when it comes to safeguarding issues and child safety issues, you've got to put the child first, because they cannot safeguard themselves. You know, the key is you are responsible as parents. We are to safeguard our children and to care for them. Therefore, if there is possibility that they might suffer harm, we've got to protect them from that harm, because they can't do it themselves. So when there's a situation, if there's someone has not shown a sense of remorse, a willingness to change, then although you might love them unconditionally from the point of view, and God does, you know, well, whatever they've done, because Jesus has already died to forgive them for whatever they've already done, that doesn't mean that you just allow them carry on doing those things again and again and again. Because in one sense, there has to be a sense of a change of their lives to align with God's desire for them, and God doesn't want them to do anything harmful to others. But where I know the boundaries, okay, you've forgiven this person, but this person hasn't changed. Well, are you going to allow someone who hasn't changed the opportunity to do what they've done before again? No, you're not. If that person really wants to have contact with children, grandchildren, whatever it might be, in whatever situations these happen in life, then they need to have shown some sense of, I'm not going to do this again. And if they don't, then that's their choice not to be able to have access, because they are unwilling to own or admit or actually go through whatever they need to change. And therefore there may be that, you know, it's like if you're in court and you come before the judge and the judge sentences you because if you've done something, he may sentence you to anger management, to manage your anger so you won't go and punch someone again. Well, if you're not willing to do the anger management course, then there are consequences for you not doing it. So in a situation, I don't think it's wrong to look for evidence of change in those sort of safeguarding issues for boundaries and things to be done with wisdom at all. It's not saying you don't love, it's not saying you haven't forgiven, but you have to be making sure that you safeguard those who need safeguarding first, primarily above everything else, because they can't do that for themselves usually, you know. Yeah, but it's not easy, obviously, because you've got people, relationships, history, you know, memory, you know, of what's going on, and you know, and you obviously don't want to be operating out of bitterness or resentmentful or hurt, and therefore even for the person who's been suffered, you know, helping them to get the help they need so that they actually are free from the trauma and the effects of what's happened to them, so that they can see things more clearly. But again, even seeing things clearly and having had things dealt with doesn't mean that you're going to put yourself in the situation to allow it to happen again.
So in your explanation, you mentioned the redemptive gifts.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's difficult for one to know what their gifts are. I'm tracking with people who are now asking, what's my mandate? What's my mandate? And I keep saying, look into yourself. I remember when I came to you, your mandate is there. It's always been there. We just don't recognize it because we've never been taught to observe it. And now that we are rising as sons, I think it's very important for us to know what the redemptive gifts are in us and how to use it in this time. So how would you help someone? I know I'm on your course, so I have the understanding, but literally help someone to come to the recognition of what their true redemptive gifts are and how to operate in them.
I think it's helping them identify the difference between redemptive gifts, spiritual gifts, personality types, all of the different things that make up who they are, and helping them to see that God has created them in a particular way that is designed to help them fulfill their identity and destiny. So they're wired in a particular ways to engage the world. And ultimately, I think as we become more and more like Jesus, we become more rounded in redemptive gifts, but there's still primarily certain things which I think are the way we sort of see the world, think about it, and engage, you know. So when it comes to that, helping people realize that some of the way they do things and the way they think about things is related to the way God made them, and they don't need to try and change that. They need to try and benefit from it and use it. And then that means they don't be like anybody else. You know, redemptive gifts are individually for the person. You don't therefore look at someone else, oh, I want to be like them, because they may have a totally different redemptive gift, which means that if you're trying to be like them, you're trying to operate outside of really who you are. So when it comes to things like that, you know, once person has an idea and they have a desire, then you begin then to help them identify the way they see the world by asking them the right questions. Now, obviously, redemptive gift surveys are designed to help Christians identify the way God made them to be, and those surveys are there to help with questions about how people think about things and how people do things. Two different redemptive gift surveys that make up the whole is how I see the world and how I then operate in the world. And if you're, you know, for me, redemptive gift prophet teacher, when I look at the world, I'm looking at how to understand why is this happening? Why did this happen? What's going on? How can I explain this? How can I learn from what's happened so that if something negative's happened, we learn and we learn not to do that again. So it's a very different way from looking at the world from someone like Mercy Gift, who's just looking at the poor people who are suffering, where I'm looking at why they're suffering and how we can stop them suffering. Now, that's a longer term goal in a visionary sense, because it's not immediately dealing with the suffering. But if you just deal with the suffering and then you don't deal with why the suffering's going on and what can we do to stop the suffering, then you keep having to deal with the suffering over and over and over again, which is just, you know, that's not learning to bring about change. So, you know, I am wired to see things from a point of, how do I understand this? How do I see this in the context of God's overall purposes? And does this align with God's kingdom? If it doesn't, how do we make sure that we deal with it so that change takes place? And then, you know, I'm also wired to teach other people and help other people to perceive and see things as well. You know, but other people, you know, if they are mercy gifts, they'll see very differently and they want to deal with the immediate situation. But if you just have mercy people, then they just try and deal with the immediate situation, but they don't deal with the long term of how can we change this? How can we learn? How can we do things differently? And then there are those who are wired to rule, and they are organizers, and they begin to say, okay, here's the situation. What am I going to do to bring order into this situation of chaos? There are those who are givers. What can I do to give into this situation of my time or my skills or my money or whatever it might be to help this situation? And people will be moved to respond to the same situation differently, depending upon the way they're wired to connect with that situation. The problem is when you get a group of people, people tend to think everyone should be like them. So they don't understand that people see things differently, and therefore they can get frustrated with people because they don't see the world the way they do. Well, that's not how it should be. You need to, within a group of people, identify the different sorts of people of redemptive gift, and then make sure that those people have got the best fit within a group to enable them to be themselves. You know, you don't give mercy gift people time-sensitive tasks to do because they get distracted and on the way because they come across someone who needs help, and then they forgot what they were doing. You know, if they were, you know, sent to the bank to pay in a check or something, oh, they've met some homeless person on the way, and they suddenly start, oh, I'm going to take you for a coffee and go do this, and then they go, oh no, the bank's closed, I can't pay the check in. You know, so well, we needed that check paid in today because we're going to spend it. You know, well, you've got to be careful. You don't give the right people wrong jobs, or, you know, give them things that they're not suited to. And within a team environment, you want the broad spectrum of all the different things operating so that you can have a fully functioning team that sees the world in a multifaceted way, you know, and that really helps. But I would certainly encourage people to do redemptive gift surveys and, you know, to begin to understand that it's okay to be different and to reconcile themselves and be comfortable with themselves.
Mike, you had mentioned a couple weeks ago in dealing with the redemptive gifts in a religious situation where you identify yourself and like as a giver, and it becomes more out of duty, and it becomes, well, I'm a giver, so I'm fulfilling everything God's doing. It was kind of the thing, your comment. I don't want to have to tell you what you said, but it was like sometimes in order to bring those things into a better place is then you're not given the opportunity to give, or
okay, yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
What you're saying, well, basically, when God brings us to a place of knowing who we are, we'll probably realize that a lot of what we've been identifying with is what we do. And our soul uses what we do to self-validate, and even doing the right things. It doesn't have to be wrong things, but it's still using those things in an independent way, because that gives us our own sense of value, worth, because we do something. You see, God values us, and we have an infinite worth with God, even if we did nothing, because we're just his children. Do you look at your children and say, well, I value them because they look after me, or I value them because they got this job, or they value them because they're successful? No, we just look at our children and say, well, they're our children. We value them just because of who they are. So to deal with that issue, sometimes God has to highlight to people that they are operating out of a sense of works and performance, and their identity is coming from what they do. So to challenge that, he may remove opportunities of doing the things that they do. So then it's like, well, who am I now? Well, I can't give. Well, I don't know who I am. And I'm struggling, because it's like, well, what am I supposed to do? And, and that whole dynamic. So in my situation, that was bringing me to a point where my soul had to come to a point of surrender, to stop doing things independently, to create my own identity. And therefore, God stopped me being able to see and hear and engage, until I realized that my soul needed to surrender to who I was, rather than continue to need to do all these things. Everyone's different, so it might be that someone who's a giver, but they're getting their identity of a giver, and that is what's giving them their identity, rather than God, that God will engineer a way to bring them to that reality, that they're not a giver because of giving, they're a giver because God called them a giver and created them as a giver, which is very different. Therefore, when you're not giving, you don't feel any differently about yourself, because you know who you are without the works, but it takes a long thing for that, because a lot of people are conditioned into programmed behavior and works coming to create that identity. And therefore, if you don't do something, then, well, who am I? And all of that. Same thing would be like a mother is spent all her adult life, or a lot of it, looking after her children as a mother, and then the children will leave the nest and fly away and go home, go away, and then it's like, oh, who am I now? Well, I can't. Well, you're still a mother. You're not a mother because if you do mother things. You're a mother because you gave birth to children. So it's a different way of thinking. And I know a lot of issues with people, they are about performance and the need to gain their value and be valuable in other people's sight because of what they do. There's a huge pressure. And a lot of people are on the rat race, or the hamster wheel, going round and round, or doing more and more and more and more and more. Not really getting anywhere, and never really feeling fulfilled, because works won't fulfill you in the long run. You've got to come to a sense of rest in who you are and a state of being. This is who I am. I'm living in this state of being, whether I do anything or not. And I think that's really where that whole understanding comes in. And if we're cooperating with God, or God is working in our lives to bring about restoration or to bring about transformation, then he's going to challenge the things which are operating independently. And while my soul was in charge, I was not free in the spirit to engage in different realms, because my soul and spirit were always connected to one another from the soul to the spirit, which controlled where I could be. And it would be, I go into the realms of heaven, spirit and soul engage, and then come back out, spirit and soul. But when I became separated and reintegrated, when my soul surrendered control, then I was connected from spirit to soul, not soul to spirit. And therefore I can live in the realms of heaven in the spirit and actually be operating here on the soul, connected to the world around me, and be informed and see the world around me from an internal perspective, not an external one. So I'm not interpreting things that I see from outside in. I'm able to perceive and understand from the inside out, which is really what God is wanting to bring us into, a state of being in which we're operating from the inside out, not the outside in. But it does take some time for that to take place. And, for me, there was a period of 4 months where, I had to go through the misery of facing the fact that my soul was operating independently, even doing the right things, but for the wrong motive, for my own value, my own worth, from what I was doing the right things. But everything changed significantly afterwards when I learned that I don't have to be operating from the soul to the spirit, and my identity is not based on what I do, but who I am. But not an easy one, because we're conditioned by the world in that way.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one. As you were speaking, I'm just wondering how would it look like when everyone is just being, and we move away from what we know how to do?
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately you'd be living heaven on earth, basically. No one gets paid in heaven. No one gets given a reward, a monetary reward, for what they're doing. What they're doing as an outworking of who they are is a reward in itself. There's satisfaction and fulfillment in just being yourself. So I think as more and more people discover their identity and move away from the I need more stuff, the materialism of the world, which is driven by the need to have stuff to make you happy, then the whole economy based on profit and greed will begin to collapse, and people will begin to realize that the most important things are well-being, spirit, soul, body, not how much money you've got in the bank or how many things that you've got, which don't really make people happy. But when people know who they are, they'll realize that their value is not based in how much salary they earn, or how big a house they've got, or how many cars they've got, or how many of those things. So things change in terms of priorities and values. And I believe the well-being economy will begin to change from gross domestic product, and we need more money, so we're going to sell more things, therefore we need to make more things more cheaply. And you've got this whole system which is designed to essentially make profit out of most people's misery and sell people stuff they don't need, on the basis of, will that make you happy? And that's what advertising is all about. Advertising sells you an illusion that you need this to be happy. That isn't true. Happiness is not a result of materialistic things. It's not saying we can't have things, but things shouldn't have us. And it's really the motive of our heart in needing things, which is the key. And do we understand and feel and sense the motive of our hearts? What's driving us? Are we driven? Materialism is a driven thing because you need things, otherwise you don't feel good. We should live in love, joy, and peace. which has nothing to do with what we've got. It's to do with who we are, being in Christ and Christ in us. So everything changes really from that perception. But it's, it is not an easy thing to have a lifetime's worth of conditioning and thinking and behavioral things just change overnight. So it is a process of renewing the mind. So we see things differently. We're not pressed into a worldly mold or a religious mold or any other mold. We can just be free to be us. And that's God's intention, really. He wants us to be free to be us, not conditioned or programmed or driven by any externals, but motivated by the internal desire to outwork the purposes of God through who we are.
And that is where the challenge is, isn't it, Mike? Doing something that this is you get all satisfaction from it, and then the bills come through the door. And the question is, oh my God, what do I do with this? And the reality of the need for money and the in life, and also the reality to become just you is a big conflict, I believe, on this journey for me, becoming me and just focusing on the Lord and where he's leading me, and then looking at the reality around me that is falling apart is really sometimes difficult to it's like a conflict going on around me constantly, and sometimes I wonder.
Well, obviously we're living in a world that is not yet restored, and so we're in transition. A lot of things, it's our mindset changes before the practical things change. So our mind towards money and towards material things needs to change. Therefore, we can be living, even going to work, having money, having things, but they don't have us, they don't control us until we don't need them anymore. So it starts in the mind. What is my mindset towards money, well-being, the need for, all of that? Now, when that changes, then you're not controlled by it anymore. Doesn't mean that you don't have any money, but the money doesn't control you. And then if God ever asks you to give, then you will, even if you don't want to, but then the more you are aligned to the Father's heart, the more you will want to. And that's really part of the issue. So at the moment, we live in a world where money is needed. If we don't have it, then we're going to struggle to live or eat or have anywhere to live or anything like that. Now, that may not be the case forever, but initially we need to make sure our mindset towards money is correct, that we're not using it for the wrong reasons, that we're not using it for the wrong motives, that it is not validating ourselves, that it's also not making us feel, well, I've got money, I'm safe, I'm secure. Bottom line is money is not safe and security, because it just it can disappear. You can lose it all overnight. If the bank system collapsed overnight, what would we all do? How would we have access to anything? Well, we probably wouldn't. So then you've got to live differently. And I think God is preparing us to live differently by challenging our thinking towards things now, so that when the changes take place, our mindsets are already there. Therefore, we're already living in a non-materialistic way, even though we may still have money and still have a job. Our mind is not operating that way. And that takes some renewal of the mind, obviously, because it's difficult for people, when, well, I need money, I've got to pay my rent, I've got to eat, I've got to pay the bills, well, yeah, absolutely true. But who is your provider, God or your job? When you see it as that is part of God's provision right now, then the job is not the issue, and there's nothing wrong in working. I believe ultimately we will work without the need for financial remuneration, because we're living a different system. But right now, we're not. So right now, I think the key is the mindset towards money, material things, that changes so they don't have a hold on us. They're not important to us in the same of the value and worth of something is not how much money it's worth or anything else. Once our mind is changed, then we live as if the change has already taken place, even if it hasn't. And I think that's important to see. When your mind changes towards something, you live in a different frame of reference towards it. You're living in a state of being and not doing. And I think that is a renewal of the mind, which is a process, and it takes time. And God will give opportunities for us to see where we are on the journey and process. And then you begin to become self-aware and realize, oh, I'm operating out of the wrong thought here. And particularly when it comes to money and happiness and all of that. You've just had your Thanksgiving over in the US. What are you giving thanks for? We don't have a Thanksgiving Day in the UK. So we don't have that thought, but I wonder what people are thankful for. And I know it's a time of family and people reconnecting and things. So maybe that is showing the value of those things, but maybe other people may be more thankful for the fact that, they've got a roof over their head or material things. And I think it's not wrong to be thankful that we have things and we are living in a place where we're able to live and eat and function. It's not wrong to be thankful for that. But if we didn't have it, how would we feel about ourselves? And that's the question to ask. If Paul said, I'm content with everything, I'm content with nothing. Sometimes he operated as a tent maker and did some work to enable him to minister. Other times the local people who invited him to come and minister supported him in the ministry. But he was content either way, because his mind was already renewed to that reality. And I think that's what God is doing, renewing the mind, freeing us from mindsets which control us, so that eventually we will live in the reality of that change, whereas at the moment we're living in the reality of the thought of the change in our minds and the contentment that we live with a changed way of thinking, even within the current context. So, money does not drive me. I'm not driven by the need. I need more money. I need more money. I need more money. And then that you've got the right frame of reference towards money, finances, and other things, and they're not controlling you. But we are in transition. We can't say that everything has changed when it hasn't. There's still a lot to do in that financial area, and still the financial systems control the world. And they're still making money out of people's misery. So that has to change ultimately. So I do believe that the likelihood is there will be some severe shakings of financial systems to change the ones who are in control of it all.
Yeah. I've had experience where the Lord said to me, the currency of heaven, the true currency is love.
Yeah.
It's not money, it's love. And since that, since I started working in agreement with that, I could see the way he does it, and I'm seeing better trading around me a lot. So he's bringing people into my sphere who would, and somebody will say something like, and because I'm a messy person, when somebody is in need and I'm not able to meet their need, it really affects me. And these are some of the things that I am also learning how to step away from and allow Father to be the giver, not me. But when it came to him showing me what the currency of heaven is, the currency of the kingdom is actually love, he actually is like he's opening doors for different people to come into my life who have what I need at certain times to exchange. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like he's been creating opportunities around me to see how he is taking care of me without me doing the worldly money thing. So what you are saying is very true. I believe we are not there yet, but we are seeing drops of what he means by the currency of heaven is love and relationship, and not money.
Absolutely, yeah. And when you love, and when you're loving unconditionally and freely, you feel well. When you're thankful and grateful for things rather than focusing on what you don't have, it actually brings health to the body. It programs the immune system. Thanksgiving and gratitude and that attitude is such a powerful one, because we're designed to live in that, in a state of awareness and joy, which brings about the whole, even our whole being in a state of well, our mind, our body, our spirit, all really in that state of oneness and union and relationship, which is really, really important to see that God is doing that. But we're just going to cooperate, and sometimes that is a bit of a challenge, particularly when we're in situations that don't seem to be working out the way we want them to. And then do I trust God in those situations, or then do I think, I better go out and try and fix this? I've got to go and do something. I've got to give God a helping hand. God's quite capable of doing things and showing us what he wants us to do without us trying to try and fix things ourselves. So, there are big changes that I think are taking place, and people's attitudes are beginning to be transformed, which ultimately, hopefully will bring about a change in societal values and norms, and what is the societal desire, which is driven often by the need for more materialism and stuff, to become, well, actually being happy is so much better than having a load of stuff, which most of it is just in the cupboard. Or how many people buy fitness machines and exercise machines and they're all in the loft or the garage or whatever, and they're not used anymore because they thought, this will make me happy, I'm going to be fitter, I'm going to be better, and actually I'm not against exercising at all. I like exercise and doing things and being fit, but actually people buy things thinking it's a shortcut, and it never is. You never get fit without some hard work, really. But they're sold as that. They're sold as shortcuts to fitness, whether it be spiritual fitness or emotional fitness or body fitness. It takes a lot of work to be fit. Some people want the easy thing. I remember when I was a kid, they were always advertising bull workers, which were these sort of things where you pulled things and pressed things and whatever else, as a almost like using sort of muscle techniques or whatever, rather than lifting weights or just doing work. And to be honest, it's like most people realized it didn't work, and then they were selling, you can have a six-pack if you put these electrodes on your abdomen while you're watching the TV, and it will just stimulate your abdomen muscles and you'll get a six-pack watching the TV. Well, I wonder how many people bought into that and realized it didn't work, because you're not going to get something for nothing, really. And life requires us to invest into it, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
I've had, this is just real quick. I've had a discussion with my 15-year-old grandson he's brilliant. He's just one of those brilliant kids. He's athletic. He's really has the world ahead of him. And yet he is making the choice right now not to go to university, not to do that, but he wants to be an auto mechanic. And at first it was like, why don't you want to, there's something, and it's just made me think how often we put expectations on our children, on each other, to be and not value what those intrinsic desires are. And because I really feel like he'll be an excellent mechanic because he's an engineer too.
Yeah.
But the importance of university, the importance of, and I'm not devaluing education, because you learn all through life as far as that goes. But to put all the importance on going and getting a degree. So and I don't know, I've been thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against education at all, but for some people, they like working with their hands, and therefore getting a trade is probably much more in tune with what makes them happy. And sending them to do academic work would probably make them very unhappy, you know. But I do believe having, you know, as Christians, I think having those who are academic and can hold their own in academic circles and whatever is not a bad thing, because we do need to take back some of that academic thing, because Christians were always at the forefront of academia and science and everything else. And then, you know, for the last couple of 100 years, we've sort of drifted away from it because of the wrong eschatology and mindsets of, well, what's the point of going to university because we're all going to be rescued and raptured away, you know. So the balance swung the wrong way. I think having an education is great, but you need to educate people in their right way for what is for them, something that is going to help them become who they are made to be, not just per se, because education is right for everyone. The right sort of education is good. And for some, that might be a practical education, not just a, you know, academic one. You know, because you put someone who's, let's say, a musician or an artist, and you try and get them to work in a factory, oh man, it's like they're just miserable, you know, because it's like they need freedom to think, and they need to be able to produce and make stuff and do stuff, you know. So it's really helping the right sort of, you know. And there's nothing wrong in someone who's an artist going to art college and learning the techniques of art and being trained and equipped to help them be better. You know, there's nothing wrong in that. Absolutely. Yeah, so I think it's really helping the right person to find the right thing that works for them, and not try and, oh, you need to go to college just because, well, that should be the thing everyone does. Well, that person might not be suitable for that, and they'll be miserable if they go and try and do all that academic work when they really should be working with their hands, you know, and doing something practical, you know. So, and I think that's why, you know, bringing up a child in the way they should go, you know, which is not about the way we want them to go, but the way that God has designed them, you know. And that is the key when it comes to education, I think. What aligns to God's design for their lives, and then helping them fulfill that is the best thing, really.